We picked this Miata up from the salvage auction just over a year ago. It was a victim of Hurricane Matthew and it was flooded, and we bought it for about $800. Today we're going to go through what needed to be fixed and what our total cost was and what the car looks like now. So we're going to pop the hood and see what it looks like now, because that was the main area of concern when we picked it up. So when we brought it in, the whole area under the hood was basically covered in silt and sand, and the car wasn't running. So we ended up having to diagnose it and check out what was wrong with it to figure out if we could get it running or if we're going to part it out. The water level actually rose probably almost to the level of the airbox. So there was dirt and leaves and all kinds of stuff everywhere. Luckily, it did sit for a while, but it didn't sit long enough for it to set in and start rusting significantly. So we washed everything out, cleaned it up. The valve cover, we actually repainted just because it was stained and dirty and so on. And as far as the stuff here in the engine bay was concerned, we only ended up replacing a couple of items. So the fuel injectors that are down here, they weren't working properly. And what ended up happening is that there was some liquid that got into the injectors and basically rusted the nozzles. So we ended up replacing those at a cost of about $60. The other part that wasn't working once we were able to fix the fuel injectors was the AC. And what we found out is that the relay for the AC had corroded and fallen apart. So we spent about $8 or $9 to just get a universal relay and rewire that. As far as the rest of the items in the engine bay are concerned, after the cleaning, they were pretty much fine. We had some leakage from the clutch slave cylinder down here, so we ended up getting a new clutch slave cylinder on Rock Auto for like 12 bucks, but that was more of a maintenance item. And we went ahead and replaced the air filter and did the serpentine belt and a couple of spark plugs and a couple of other maintenance items that we would usually do. So once we got the injectors replaced, we saw that they were spraying fuel, but the car still wouldn't run. So what we ended up doing is checking the ECU, which is inside down here under the dashboard, and what we found was that the ECU had gotten some corrosion from the water. So we ended up buying a used ECU for $60. And the nice thing about the 99 and 2000 Miata is because there isn't an immobilizer, you can just unplug the old ECU and plug the new one in. Once we swapped the ECU, the car wanted to run again, but it was still struggling. So what we found was that there was water in the fuel tank. So we ended up draining the fuel tank, cleaning it a little bit, which what we did was we just unhooked the line and basically used the diagnostic connector to run the fuel pump to dump the fuel into a bucket. Once we drained all that out and replaced the fuel filter, which was 10 or 12 bucks, hooked everything back up, put fresh fuel in it, it started running and it ran perfectly. So once we got it running, which cost us probably less than $100 total, we wanted to clean up any kind of residual damage from the flooding. So what we ended up doing was taking the seats out, taking the dashboard out, and the carpet out. And we cleaned the whole interior of the car, which luckily there wasn't very much water in there. And we pulled the carpet out, steam cleaned it, and replaced it, and then basically put everything back together just as it was. We didn't have to replace any of the parts that were down there, because everything was pretty much fine, and the carpet smelled fine and still smells fine to this day after the steam cleaning. So once we put all that in there, the interior was done. So other than that, we've done some maintenance items on the car, replaced like the pads and the rotors, and we actually replaced the top. And the top we replaced ourselves, and that really wasn't damage from the flooding, that was just from age. So the top had started to show a few cracks, and it actually wasn't leaking yet, but it just looked ugly. So we ended up buying a new top with the glass, the froster window in the back from a seller on eBay for I think about $600. So went ahead and replaced that, and now that's all well and good. So the next few steps on the car are going to be to either replace the seats or replace the seat covers, maybe do a wheel and tire upgrade, or maybe do a brake upgrade. But overall, for less than $1,500 for a car that had 82,000 miles when we picked it up, we think it ended up being a great deal. And because the Miatas are so easy to work on, It didn't take very much time or effort to replace or even to take the interior out. We were able to remove everything out of the interior in probably 4 hours and put it back in just the same time. Hopefully this answers some questions about buying damaged Miatas for people that are looking at it. Buying flooded cars is always risky, so you should inspect it very carefully. In this scenario, we got pretty lucky because there are other scenarios where the engine might be hydrolocked, which we did consider. And basically, if you're looking to buy a flooded car, inspect it carefully and be ready to part it out, because in some cases it's just not worth doing the repair. In this case, we have a 2000 Miata that basically ended up at a total cost of about $1,500. That's going to work for us. That's, you know, good as a daily driver, and that we'll probably at some point use for track or autocross work. That it should be very good for many miles more, and shouldn't show any other detrimental effects from the flooding because it was just fairly easy to clean up.